Hello, and welcome to Night Creep. I want to share 3 horrifying stories with you that are all allegedly true, and they get progressively more scary and more disturbing as we get into the video. When we're all done, I hope you leave a comment letting me know what you think. Do you believe in signs? Well, this story has one giant, big, flashing red sign that I'm very glad our main protagonist actually noticed and responded positively to. Now, there's no names mentioned in this story, but I don't know about you, but personal preference, I still like to have some sort of name attached to at least the protagonist of a story. That way we have somebody to follow and maybe relate to a little bit. I'm gonna call her Laura. Laura had a big family. They were all very close. In high school, Laura's aunt was dating this guy who appeared to be very wealthy. Nice clothes, nice cars, but it was never made very clear what he actually did for a living. Although, there are probably a few of you who might be able to guess. Now, this lifestyle of wealthy clothes, fancy cars, was pretty attractive to Laura. Laura asked her aunt if she could get in touch with her aunt's boyfriend to see what it might take to work for her aunt's boyfriend. Maybe get in on some of that sweet cash. Well, Jess had a conversation with her aunt's boyfriend, and he did agree to let her work for him. Now, if you guessed he sold drugs, ding ding, you were correct. Now, the high school that Jess attended at the time had a lot of people that did a lot of drugs, unfortunately. But fortunately for Jess, this was an open, big market waiting just for her to fulfill those needs. She found a couple of small groups of guys that would buy large orders from her. She never asked any questions, she just sold the product and played along. Now, sooner than later, Jess was starting to make about $3,000 every month doing this. She certainly wasn't retiring anytime soon off of that, but admittedly, this is a lot more than any 17-year-old at the time was making. Now, despite her really enjoying this lavish lifestyle from her aunt's boyfriend, she decided to keep all of her money and her new wealth hidden. She didn't buy fancy clothes for herself. She didn't go buy a brand new car for herself. She kept it to herself, or at least she thought she did. There's no way of knowing. Now, one Saturday morning, Jess walks to one of her friend's house for a little birthday party. Not a rager or anything, just a cute little breakfast. Now, leaving the breakfast and walking back home, a guy that she had never seen before pulled up behind her in his car, parked, and he approached Laura. Now, the stranger seemed well-dressed, a little bit older, and Laura thought that he might have been a cop based on the way he looked, on the way he walked, and so on. At this point, Laura's ready to surrender. Just say, you know what, dude, whoever you are, you got me, I'm busted. But in a weird turn of events, this slightly older, well-dressed guy who walks like a cop pulled a switchblade on Laura and says, listen, make this easy. I know you've got money in your purse. Hand it over. The words in the actual story are, it's okay. I know you have money. We can make this easy. Kind of chilling. Now, Laura was going through this panic mode of her body simply not letting her react because she knows if it did, she might have had a heart attack on the spot. So she froze, not knowing what to do next. It's like her body and her mind were put into this safe zone where it said, you know what, now it's not the time to panic. Later, yes, panic. Now, no panic. Laura feels 2 things originally. The first thing, surprisingly, is relief. Oof, I'm glad this guy isn't a cop. Second thing she feels is a sense of comfort. When this dude says the words, it's okay, you can make this easy, just give me the money, that put her at ease for a moment. Laura works up the courage to say, you know what, man, you can have all my cash, it's $200, but let me keep my purse. I've got my phone, I've got pictures, I want to keep those things. Dude surprisingly said, okay, that's fine. So he watched as Laura unzipped her bag, pulled out $200, zipped it back up, and he was watching very closely throughout this entire interaction. Dude took the money, and his very last words to Laura before he left were, if you tell anyone, I will find out. Laura had a pretty calm walk for the rest of the way home. The shock and the adrenaline didn't really hit or wear off until the very next morning when she woke up and she realized she had been mugged. At this point, she starts panicking, shaking, crying, all those things. Laura states that even as she's typing this up to share it with us, she's getting chills just thinking about it and having to relive it in her own head. Now, she's not sure if the guy that approached her knew that she was dealing or if he was just trying to scare her, but in any case, I'm sure that she's thrilled that the interaction didn't last as long as it could have, or gone as dangerously as it could have. Remember when I asked you about believing in signs or not? Well, that was the sign. The guy with the switchblade demanding all the cash that Laura had on her. That was the sign that made her step back and go, you know what? maybe this business isn't for me. Making several $1,000s a month for the last little while was nice, but I think if I continue on, it's only going to get more dangerous from here. Those were the thoughts that must have been going through Laura's head when she decided to stop dealing. Laura admits that in a strange turn of events, this dude that mugged her probably saved her life. Laura contacted her boss, which is her aunt's boyfriend, and said, "You know what, I think I want to get out of the business. This is dangerous. I don't think it's right for me." Boss agrees, no repercussions. Normally there's some sort of blood in, blood out ritual on these kinds of things, but for family, I guess that's waived. He said, "You know what, it's fine. Just pass all your customers along to me. I'll take care of them." It's been 10 years now since this incident, and Laura hasn't looked back since. You know, you hear stories about people, strangers, squatting in people's basements or bedrooms, and the homeowners having no idea for weeks or months. You think, how could that ever happen to you? Well, it happened to this person, and again, for anonymity's sake, we're going to call her Jess. About 10 years ago, Jess was 31, and she lived in a two-family home on the second floor with her then toddler. Now, in order for this story to make as much sense as possible, you need to know a couple of things first. One of Jess's family friends lived on the first floor of this two-family house. They're the ones who originally referred Jess to the landlord. They each had their own private front entrances, but they shared a back entrance that had a staircase that ran all the way from the basement up to the second floor. Now, Jess would sometimes intentionally, most of the time actually, leave her back door entrance unlocked because she had a habit of locking her keys inside her house. She knew that she could rely on the first floor family friend to let her in through the back door if she ever needed it. Now, the family friend who lived on the first floor had a friend who was a little bit down and out on his luck. He had a history of substance abuse and was, at the time, supposedly clean. Now, relatively, he was a nice enough guy, and the downstairs neighbor, the family friend, had been letting him stay on his couch for a while now. The downstairs neighbor had a 4-year-old daughter at the time, and from what it sounds like, is having not a stranger, but somebody who lives on your couch full-time with no permanent plans of ever finding an exit was starting to wear on their day-to-day lives. So eventually push comes to shove and the downstairs neighbor tells this person, "Hey, I think it's time you leave." Now this all happens during the summertime, so what this down on his luck friend happens to do is he finds the covered swing on the porch of the second floor neighbor. He takes up residence there. Quickly, the upstairs neighbor, Jess, and the downstairs neighbor, the family friend, they say, "No, dude, this is not what we meant. When we asked you to leave the property, we meant you to get all the way out." Also, by this point, it had become abundantly clear that this person was using again. His behavior was very erratic. He was even making sexual advances towards Jess, making her feel very uncomfortable. Now, this dude wasn't happy that he was being asked to leave entirely, but you know what? It's not their problem. He just needed to get out. He agreed, he stopped coming around, and they didn't see him for a while after that. Fast forward about a month or two now. Jess is noticing small things around the house missing or being moved. For example, lighters, small amounts of cash that were left by the front door, for the pizza guy or something. Very inconsequential things, even small pieces of relatively inexpensive jewelry are missing too. She picks up on this. Jess doesn't suspect any foul play. She just writes these things off as, inconsequential, lost items. Now, the house that they lived in was very old. It had paper-thin walls, and the back door was right against the window of the bathroom where the shower was. And it made a very distinct noise when you opened it. Now, one day, Jess's car was at the mechanic shop, so it's probably safe to assume that it looked like she wasn't home, but she was. She was taking a shower in the bathroom right next to the back door when she heard the sound of the back door open. Remember, it's got a very distinct sound. Jess freezes. She's immediately scared. The downstairs neighbor, which is the family friend, and Jess that lives up top, they don't share living spaces, so it's very weird for somebody to come into her area of the house, especially when she's showering. She's scared. Jess is a self-proclaimed notorious wimp. She says ever since childhood, she's had this habit of hearing every strange noise and thinking that she's about to be murdered. Doesn't know where she gets it from, it's just maybe instinctual. Well, she's still in the shower, and after several minutes of pretty much holding her breath and not being murdered Alfred Hitchcock Psycho style, she writes it off. She forgets it and she lets it go. Now, I mentioned that this 2-story family house had a basement as well. The basement was huge, it was shared, and the landlord would go down there to put stuff away and store things from time to time. And there were a lot of little pockets and little sections of boxes and dark corners for people to go into and not be seen for a while. Do you see where I'm going? Jess rarely goes down there. There's not a huge need for her to be down there all the time anyway. She keeps most of her stuff on her second floor. Well, one day the landlord comes by, goes down into the basement, and he hears a strange noise. Even with all the lights on, there's still dark corners in this big cavernous, well, I'd say cavernous, but there's still lots of boxes in there in this big space. Landlord hears a strange noise, grabs a baseball bat, ready to go just in case there's something weird down there. Landlord then runs into the dude that was living on the bottom floor couch, that tried to live on the porch of the second floor, that we hadn't seen in months, that had been making sexual advances towards Jess. He sees this dude in the basement. This dude lunges at the landlord. Even though he's holding a baseball bat, he still runs right at him, pushes the landlord down onto the ground, runs out of the basement and down the street. They call the police, and after a little bit of investigation and search, they find this dude in a trash can around the corner. Upon some further investigation, the police discovered that the basement window had been propped open ever so slightly. After diving into the basement around all the boxes and corners and stuff, the police find this dirty nest of blankets, Jess's missing items, and drug paraphernalia. Now, in the middle of all this chaos, this dude left his flip phone in the basement before he ran out. Going through the phone, we see what's reported to be quote-unquote a lot of pictures of Jess sleeping. Now, it doesn't specify how many photos of Jess were in this dude's flip phone, but I mean, honestly, one is more than enough. One is already too many of her sleeping. This dude had been high on crack cocaine, living in this basement for months, coming in and out of Jess's apartment when she wasn't home and when she was sleeping regularly. While he seemed like a nice guy, he was pretty regularly high on hard drugs most of the time, and that just simply that changes somebody. Now, Jess to this day still gets chills just thinking about what could have happened to her and her child at the time with this dude just staying in there unknowingly. The worst part is his charges eventually got dropped. They never even consulted Jess as the victim, and this is far from his first criminal offense. Now, the state that Jess lives in is notoriously soft on non-violent criminals, regardless of whether there was a victimless crime or not. Now, Jess also goes on to state that her local police department is also notorious for making deals in exchange for information. Even on small-time dealers like this guy, there was no justice for Jess. Now, luckily for Jess, it didn't have much of a lasting impact on her mental health or her psyche or anything. It was just more of a what the fuck kind of an instance. I'm glad she's okay. What would you do if you found somebody with pictures of you on their phone while you were asleep? Regardless of them being a druggie or hiding in the basement or any of that. Comment below. This story about a meetup that turned incredibly violent has two twists that I did not see coming. Listen to this. He was 16 years old and had just met a kid that lived up the street from his own house. For anonymity's sake, we're going to call our main character Jake, and this new kid that Jake just met up the road, he's going to be Steve. Steve says to Jake, "Hey man, I've seen you around before. We should probably hang out sometime." Jake says, "Sure thing." Gives him his phone number, says hit him up anytime. Just the following week later, Jake gets a text from Steve asking, "Hey, do you want to meet up and play basketball later?" Jake says, "Yeah, sure thing, sounds like fun. Why not, right?" Steve also asks if Jake smokes weed. Coincidentally, Jake actually does smoke weed, and Steve asked if Jake could bring some to the basketball game. Not too out of the ordinary for teenage behavior, I suppose. Now Jake, knowing that there was going to be a basketball game, he brought a couple of friends. Jake brought 2 friends to help play and to help smoke. But to be honest, by the time that Jake and his friends got there, they were already, let's just say, pretty relaxed. The basketball court that they were all supposed to meet at wasn't too far away from Jake's normal neighborhood. It was just a little bit on the outskirts. Not a bad part of town or a bad neighborhood by any means, just a little bit further than where he normally goes. Now Jake and his friends arrive at the park, they park their car, and as soon as they all get up to leave and exit the car, they're quickly ambushed. Steve and 8 of his closest friends sneak attack Jake and his 2 friends. It's 9 versus 3. So what they do is they split up. Every member of Jake's friend group gets 3 of Steve's friend group on them. There's no way that anybody can come out of this without getting hurt. Now, as this collective beatdown was happening, Jake was able to look over and see one of his friends being stabbed by 3 other dudes. Now, in the middle of this pandemonium, this collective beatdown, Jake gets held at gunpoint, he gets pistol whipped, they ran his pockets and stole his wallet and his phone. To make matters especially worse and tragic, Jake's convinced that he actually died for a little bit because he says he literally shit himself while being choked to unconsciousness. Jake was drenched in blood. His nose was broken and his eyes were starting to swell shut. But in this weird, surreal twist of fate, and here's the first twist of the story, Jake's being woken up by one of his attackers. One of his attackers is leaning over Jake, actively resuscitating him, trying to bring him back to consciousness so that Jake can drive them home. What the plan was, according to the gang, was to basically beat these dudes, steal his car, and go on living their life. But what they didn't plan on was Jake drove a stick shift. And nobody in this 9-member gang knew how to drive a stick shift, which is why they had to resuscitate Jake so that he could drive all of them to where they needed to be later on. It's truly twisted. Now, we don't know exactly in the story, at least, and there's no follow-ups in the comments of the story, where he was able to drive these gang members to. I would assume just some field somewhere close enough to a neighborhood where they were familiar with. Unsure, but he did drive his friends home, and he was able to drive himself, barely, holding on for dear life, just white-knuckling to a gas station. Now, at this point, Jake is back from pretty much the brink of death. His friends were attacked. He can hardly see because his eyes are swelling shut so tight. Blood everywhere. Shit everywhere, too. He makes it to a gas station. He walks in. The clerk at the gas station looks like he's seen a ghost. He doesn't say a word. He just turns like sheet white. Jake asks, "Hey, man, where's the bathroom?" The only thing that the attendant can do is just point to the corner of the building. So Jake walks over there, finds the bathroom, cleans himself up. Jake eventually makes it home. He takes a proper shower, and he calls the cops. Now, Jake claims that the conversation with the police seemed a little bit, it almost had like a shame on you for meeting up with these people so late kind of vibe, as if it was Jake's fault that he was mugged and beaten half to death. Or probably much more than half to death. The cops did not take him seriously at all. Now, a short while later, an undercover cop arrives at Jake's house to get some information, and Jake learns that the police know exactly who it is that robbed him. Here's the second twist. The police hired Steve as an informant, but Steve reneged on the deal, and he eventually robbed the people that he was doing a controlled buy from. Jake. Now, at this point, Jake is pretty much pleading with this undercover police officer to go stop Steve. They know where he lives. They hired him. Yeah, it sucks that he double-crossed the police and ended up beating us instead of turning us in for having weed. But damn, dude, look at me, man. My nose is broken. I just washed off all this blood. My eyes are swollen nearly shut. Look at my pants, dude. Now, Jake did eventually get to arrange a photo lineup, but everybody looked the same. Plus, since the attack happened so late at night and it was an ambush, there was very little time to actually look and recognize who was doing all the beating that was going on. 2 months pass. Additional cops show up to Jake's house. They knock on the door. Jake's mom answers the door this time. Now, she's eager to help. She's very pro-cop. Good for her. Cops say, "Hey, we're here to see Jake." She rushes them upstairs to his bedroom. The cops shake Jake awake in his bed. They shove a picture in his face and they say, "Who is this?" Very sternly, almost violent. They're pissed. Jake, wiping the eye boogies out of his face, says, half asleep, "I don't know, man. How should I know? I've never seen that person before." The officer responds, "You called this person from your cell phone. Who is he?" Jake now responds, "You mean the cell phone that I reported stolen in a violent robbery from 2 months ago to the police?" Oops. Right? All the cops in the room just sink. Jake adds, "They beat me almost to death. You should probably go read that report." Now, all the officers in the room are still silent. They're really just blue screen, right? They eventually apologize and they explain that the cell phone that they had stolen from Jake was used to set up another robbery. However, this next victim did not make it out alive. He was fatally shot. Jake responds with, "Hey, listen, I told you guys. If these guys weren't stopped, they were going to do it again and it was going to be worse the next time." He was right. Now, these cops came in blazing glory, hoping to catch a real live criminal, before he got away. But they left in shame. Which sucks, man. Jake now suffers from severe PTSD, and for the last 17 years since this has happened, he's kept tabs on his assailant, because he's convinced that this is not over yet. Jake has lost the ability to trust anybody. Now, Jake confirms after a little bit of back and forth in the comments that his phone that was stolen that night wasn't able to be traced because it was a prepaid, low-tech flip phone. Now, Steve, on the other hand, he has active warrants and charges that keep getting dismissed for things like assault, both kinds, burglary, arson, stalking, strangulation, you name it, man. And the scary part is, he's still out there. I would like for you to leave a comment down below letting me know which story you thought was the scariest and what kinds of stories you want me to cover next. Hiking stories, broad daylight stories, nighttime stories, you tell me.